It's a great privilege to be offered the opportunity to give the Mishnah for me, to be one of the Magidei Shiurim. In particular, I've just finished my Shloshim for my late mother, Harini Kaporos Mishkova, and it is well known that Mishnayos are said and learnt during the period of Avelus because they help to be an ilui for the neshama. As everyone knows, Mishnah is Osios Neshama. What we're going to start off with is to give an introduction to the Shisha Sidra Mishnah in general, and then I'm privileged to be able to continue, hopefully, going through Seder Roim, starting with Brachos. Now let's start from the very, very beginning, the history of the Mishnah. We all now have nice printed editions. We have Mishnayos which have all sorts of meforshim around them. But originally, Torah Sheba'al Peh was Ba'al Peh. It was not written at all. It was learnt Ba'al Peh. And there are opinions that say that even in the time of the Midbar, the Mishnah was learnt. Not necessarily in quite the same shape or form as we have it today, because obviously the Tanoim had not yet come into the picture. But it's said that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he learned Torah with Aaron and with the sons of Aaron and with the Klal Yisrael, they actually had a structure of a Mishnah in the Midbar. If you would look at Chagiga Davov Amud Aleph, the Meromei Sada of the Netziv, tells us that the Mishnayos were actually learnt in the Midbar. There's also a very famous Or HaChaim HaKodesh, which says that Moshe Rabbeinu's apparent error at the time of the Mei Merivo was that he, instead of learning Mishnayos at the rock, he actually hit the rock or did something. We're not entirely sure what was Moshe's sin, but he suggests that had he learnt Mishnayos at the rock, then everything would have been in order, which gives us the background that there were such things as Torah Sheba'al Peh and Mishnayos as long ago as that. As time went on, it became more formulated, and we hear, even in the Mishnah, you talk about Mishnah Rishona lo zozo mimakomo. You find that the Mishnayos Mishnayos had an earlier format which seems to have given it its structure. Subsequently, at the time of the Tanoim, machlokas started to become much more prevalent. As Morris says in Chagiga that in early times there was no machlokas because it was all settled by the Sanhedrin, and if anybody argued with anybody else, they could get it settled. The Sanhedrin would decide finally. But then, at the period of the Zugas, we had the machlokas over the smicha, but eventually at the time of the Tanoim, things deteriorated and there was big machlokas on all different fronts, until at the end of the period of the Rishonim, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi decided he'd gather all the great Talmidei Chachomim together and they were going to make a final version of the Mishnah. It was possible during his period to do this because before that they were under tremendous pressure from the enemies, but at the time of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, he had a marvelous relationship with Antoninus, and therefore he had peaceful times. He could gather all the Chachomim together, and they decided to set down the Mishnah in the final form that we have it. However, even that is an argument. According to Rashi in Eruvin Samach Beis Amud Beis, and he also says something similar in Bava Metzia Lamed Gimel Amud Beis, Rashi says that he didn't actually write it down. He was Mesader. He sorted it all out and set it out in the form and shape that we've got it in the Shisha Sidra Mishnah. Rambam disagrees with Rashi. Rambam in his Hakadama to the Perisha Mishnah, Hakadama, beg your pardon, to the a Mishnah Torah, where he sets out the history of things. He said the Rebbe was not only Masader it, he was Mechaber it, and they actually wrote it down at that time. So according to the Rambam, it was actually written down at the time of Rebbe Yehuda Anossi with all the great Tanoim. Anything which all agreed on was written stam, and that meant that was the halacha, a stam Mishnah, and if there was another Tana who argued a minority opinion, that might also have been mentioned. But according to Rashi, it wasn't written down then, and in fact it wasn't even written down at the time of the Amoraim, because Rashi is talking at the time of Abaya. Abaya is a later Amoraim. It wasn't even written down then, probably it was written down at the time of the Sabaroim or the Gyonim. At that stage, the Gemara and the Mishnah was then finalized. But either way, whether or not it was written or whether or not it was just was Masuda, the Mishnah took its final version at that stage.